A former coworker and I used to play Call of Duty online together. He's a really nice, quiet guy in person. I'd go as far as to say as he is introverted or antisocial to a degree more so than I ever have been. I've known him for some 15 years and only once do I recall him having a girlfriend, and the relationship wasn't something I would call ideal. And it was bookended by a civil lawsuit. Saying all of this, I just want to remind you I wasn't necessarily any better off for most of my life. I bring up this friend because even though he might have not been the most talkative or social guy, when we were playing online together, it was like talking to an entirely different person. He'd be so vocal and so emotive. I never really put two and two together and realized that when we nerdy folks play online, we have this outgoing persona, it seems. And it isn't just online. Even in person, when I played Magic the Gathering at the local card shop, my playgroup was intense and boisterous. Outside the comfortable habitat of the card shop, or when we were offline, I found my friends all regress socially. My Call of Duty friend wouldn't say a word at work unless prompted, and when we were outside and someone talked to him, be it a waitress asking for his order or someone complimenting his car, he would maybe shrug and smile nervously at the most. My Magic the Gathering friends, I remember we all went to a fast food restaurant just outside the shop, and we were all wearing our gaming backpacks, shorts, high socks, novelty comic t-shirts, just looking 100% the part of a Magic the Gathering player. Looking back, I can definitely remember how different it was when we were just talking to the cashier, trying to order lunch compared to us playing the game. Our volume was low, sentences not as coherent, and these guys are really bright individuals, but they all shrink when outside their comfort zones. Maybe you experienced this or have witnessed such interactions yourself. So why does this happen? It's of course obvious. We just aren't very experienced in social relationships of most any type. But when we are in a realm of gaming or what have you, we are confident in our abilities. It isn't that we are, quote, hiding behind our screens. It's merely the fact we don't have empirical evidence that we can succeed in these real-world interactions, especially those with the opposite sex. Think about how many hours you have devoted to your hobby. You can probably count that time up in actual years instead of hours. In essence, this is a huge component to our lack of sociability. If we would just treat the things we do in our lives as skills we can improve at, well, that's the best way to adjust your mindset. From gaming to dating to just talking to strangers, it's all a skill. Understanding that idea means to understand that women are more likely to be better at this whole socialization and dating thing than we are initially. Why is that? Well, it's always been obvious to me that women I went to school with or grew up with, or the ones in my family, have had large groups of friends. As generally, they wanted to go out and, quote unquote, have fun, and have had relationships starting back in high school. So compared to us, they have quite a head start. I bring this up because when we discuss talking to women, we really have to focus on being genuine. Because the person you're talking to will be more skilled at spotting any lies and bullshit you might have spewed out. Over the years, you probably watched some pickup videos, read some strategies on how to conversate with women, learned some pickup lines, and got advice from friends on how to woo women. Some of that could actually really help if you literally have no experience with talking to women, just for the mere fact that anything is better than nothing. I personally have found that when you try to incorporate these tactics into your dating game, it presents some issues. Firstly, it's the whole being genuine and authentic thing I mentioned. Women will see right through your game if they had any experience in the dating world. They'd likely have been hit on by a guy a day on average. So maybe thousands of guys have expressed interest in them by now. Secondly, most advice and dating systems don't really help you create a conversation for the entire date, which could be a couple hours. This translates to, in the least, awkward silences, and at the most, exposing you as being incongruent with how you might have began the date as. Say you thought you could take a script or a pickup routine and add some extra chat to come across as like a funny, charming guy. With time, face to face, she's going to challenge you and pick your story apart. So yeah, they're likely better at this than you right now, but it doesn't mean it has to stay that way. How do we set ourselves on the path to improving our ability to conversate? I found the biggest factor in improving was learning to be comfortable with who I am in my history. Kind of like how you're comfortable in your various hobbies. If you can come to terms with who you are and freely share yourself with other people, you can talk about anything for hours. You have your entire past and experiences at your disposal. I can understand that it can be scary to be so vulnerable with a stranger, especially one who you're romantically interested in, but you gain so much from it. I might have implied that our nerdy backgrounds might not necessarily prepare us to be great at dating, but it's more so about the lack of socialization it inherently perpetuates. Our journey through life, through anyone's life really, is filled with unique and interesting experiences. Experiences that I want us to really hone in on and recall thoroughly. The passion you have brought to your lives of video games, studies, or careers and hobbies can be harnessed into effective ways to communicate. I want you to use your passion to sell yourself, to sell your stories. Let's take a look at the 3 passions I mentioned, and let's use me as an example by turning my nerdy past into conversation and stories that anyone can relate to. Sometimes there's a lead-in or a setup for a story. I'll use my gaming history to kind of riff off of the topic of personal growth or making a conversation about personal growth. So I start with something like, this may sound weird, but I would say one of the most pivotal moments in my life was playing a video game. Hear me out. Yes, initially I would find an escape in video games because I wasn't ever really a social person. I didn't have many friends in school, so I wasn't outside playing football in the neighborhood streets or going to the movies. I found my place really in multiplayer video games, especially one called EVE Online. It was a spaceship role-playing game, you could say. Being a nerdy guy, space has always been intriguing to me, so there is a natural affinity for that game. But why playing that game was so important to me was the fact that it changed how I spoke and my apprehension to speak. I would stutter whenever I had to talk in public, and that stutter was one of the big reasons I was kind of a shut-in. How EVE Online changed it all was giving me an outlet to speak. I eventually found myself in a leadership position in the guild I was in. And to be a leader, you would have to coordinate or manage groups of hundreds to thousands of players. Can you imagine that a typical player versus player battle in that game would involve 2,000 to 3,000 people quite regularly? So there was a huge motivation to talk well and clearly because I wanted to win these battles. With players being from all over the world, it was helpful that a leader, or what the game called a fleet commander, would speak without an accent and enunciated very clearly. It was that motivation to be good in something that I truly cared about that changed how I interact with everyone in real life. To get better at fleet commanding, I would literally talk to myself for hours, practicing words I would have trouble with, like repeating phrases that I knew I would use a lot. Sometimes as I drove to work, I would be replaying out loud the previous night's battles to perfect my speech. And though I occasionally stutter still, I found my voice in that game, and I'm generally confident speaking in public now, in front of people. It's because of that practice, and it's because of that motivation in a setting I had a great deal of fun in, that made a huge difference for me, professionally and personally. So that's the gist of the story. What am I relaying here by telling this to a woman? Well, I'm being open and vulnerable about my past, a past that maybe some might be ashamed of, with the goal of creating a connection with honesty and passion about the things I do and have done. So how does this become a conversation instead of a story, though? Well, reciprocity is a big deal for me, so I would love to know about, her past or important decisions in her life or something she overcame. And if you thought about your past and articulate it in a way that is inspirational, you come across as being worthy of admiration. You give your date a framework to respond to you in as well. It's challenging and can be a great catalyst for a deep personal connection. It's so important when you look back in your past to explore the emotion and the repercussions of your choices. So when you find your story, you practice it to yourself and work in the emotion, the consequences, or the benefits. Just like I practice my speech in EVE Online, when you organize these stories into words, you need to take great care in how you present it. This is important to you, so make it sound important. As much as the keyword passion has been used in this podcast already, it is what I want your stories to exude when you tell them. Reflect on your journey in this life and pull out these experiences with the understanding that it's interesting to you, because when you share it with people, it'll be so much more authentic. You'll find a well-crafted story is a unique experience for many people to hear. Many other men might not make the same effort to engage with her as much as I am always going to. That's where people like us can find a place to create attraction with a woman. Let's move on to another passion that we can use as a conversation starter: our studies or careers. I want to say that when we're telling our stories, that we don't inflate ourselves too much. I say that now because let's say you're a very successful and a very proud of your career that you made for yourself. As much as I'm happy for you, I don't want these conversations to revolve around how awesome you are, or how everyone thinks you're a badass at work or whatever. That's not engaging to people, and it's actually alienating if the person on the receiving end isn't as necessarily accomplished or wealthy or powerful in any arena of their lives. We want to be admirable for our honesty or humbleness and authenticity. If you want to play to your ego, there are so many other coaches and dating systems that cater to the manufactured persona type of attraction. Here, with me, I want us to stand out by how we can drive the conversation with truthfulness and hope that others can recognize and see the way you choose to live your life as something they'd like to be a part of. So back to schooling and careers. I didn't really like the whole college thing myself. I dropped out of college 1 month into my first semester, and I had to pay back the scholarship I received from the school. When it comes to relating to school, it's not that I can understand how it is to be a college student, but I can appreciate the type of person who can get through it. My story will touch on both schooling and my career. So let's say the leading question from your date is, what college did you go to? Now, I know many people who didn't go to college, and they're kind of self-conscious about answering that question. But remember, we need to embrace our past, because if you like yourself in any way, then all the experiences and decisions you made culminated in the person you are right now. So I'll answer the question with, I didn't really go to college. I went for a month and I figured out real fast it wasn't for me. I remember sitting in my first class. It was college algebra, I think. The professor said to open the class, I take attendance here and it's part of your grade. Also, homework is a large portion of your grade. I got up and left and never went back to college algebra. And over the next 2 weeks, I stopped going to the rest of my classes. And though part of the reason I didn't like college was my general distaste for school, I think the bigger reason is the fact I was working for many years by the time I started college. When I was 11, the internet started becoming like a big deal. Back then, you needed a dial-up modem to connect to the internet, and America Online was the biggest provider. AOL gave each user a free website or hosting storage to play around with and create their own homepage. I dabbled in it, and it was fascinating to me. AOL didn't give full control over the website, though. The only way to take website creation to the next level was to learn how to code a website from scratch, so I taught myself HTML to do that. By just using website tutorials and user forums, I was able to create decent websites in just a few months. But as we all know, a website is made awesome with visuals and graphics specifically. I couldn't afford to pay anyone to make my website graphics, nor was there Google image search back then. So I downloaded a pirated copy of Adobe Photoshop 5.0 and started teaching that to myself. I would say within a few years, I got really good at both skills. And then something big happened within my family. My parents got divorced, and my sister and I stayed with my mom, but my mom didn't really have a huge paying job. She was an administrative assistant, and she did everything in her power to make ends meet. But eventually things came to a head. I could tell we didn't really have anything. Just from seeing her stress and knowing we didn't have the greatest things to eat, we lived off canned food, such as Vienna sausage and Spam, for years. Having these marketable skills of graphic design and website creation, I kind of put myself out there and found a job to help my family. And I was 15 when I found that job, and I put in 30 plus hours a week with that company, so it didn't leave much time for high school. I hardly went. So when college came around, I've been making okay money for years, and it was an opportunity cost for me. Possibly the job made me kind of lazy when it came to my study habits. But yeah, I dropped out and worked full time, and I've been doing the same thing for the past 20 years now. So what does this story say about me as a person? Well, I like to think it shows that I'm a self-starter in a way, that I'm a capable person generally, and that family is important to me. My date can relate to those things perhaps, but the things I'd like her to take away from that story would be there isn't some set path that we must follow to find success. Also, let's say she found me as a successful person. I like that story to help normalize me and help me be relatable as a person who understands like the common person struggle just to get by every day. So how does this become a conversation? Well, of course, I'd love to know what she does for work and what she did in school and what school she went to. But truthfully, I care more about her ideas of college and work. Big ideas of what is meant for people and what is healthy for people. An example would be segueing into another culture's ideas of work, such as in Japan, where work life is really toxic and soul-destroying to some extent. Or in regards to college, does she think college is necessary for success? And from a societal level, is pushing college onto everyone beneficial to them considering the debt most people will take on and the fact that I would say most people don't typically use your degree in the job they ultimately take after schooling. I like to explore people's perspectives, but please note, I don't take hard positions on these topics because it can be very divisive. Make sure when you're discussing topics that might hit close to home with some people that you're obviously interested in their opinions and not coming into the conversation with an agenda to trap people or assert dominance of knowing more than them about something. Humbleness is important to sincerity. And remember, we're trying to connect with them, not make them feel terrible about themselves. Okay, let's move on to another example of a passion that can help drive a conversation. Hobbies. As I've gotten older, my priorities have changed when it comes to things I found much enjoyment in. But for sure, Magic the Gathering has been a constant in my life. But how do I take a topic like magic that is like mostly obscure to people in regard to pastimes and make it relatable to a woman sitting across the table from me? It was and still is important to me, like I mentioned in my first podcast. I would say the only friends I had in middle school were the ones I played Magic with. Anyways, I found it pretty common when discussing a date's interests that some of those interests would be one of the following: fashion, accessories, dressing up, like luxury bags, makeup, getting their nails done, stuff like that. I guess that's no different than us sharing our interest in video games, so don't think I bring it up due to any superficiality of those things. If those things are truly interests of hers, I can play off that and contribute to the conversation by talking about Magic the Gathering and how it relates to like a low point in my life and how it relates to finances, investments. So you might think, well, how do they relate? Well, I'll just share the story with you. To start it off, there's typically a lead-in along the lines of, this is her saying this: you may think I'm shallow, but I love Louis Vuitton bags. I reply saying, nonsense. I don't think that's shallow at all. Financially, it's a costly investment, sure, but I wholeheartedly support luxury purchases if they are instead of, say, buying into fast fashion. Yes, obviously, Louis Vuitton bags look better than, say, Michael Kors, but when I look at it, it's more about the ability to recoup the funds from the higher-end classic accessories. With there being an incredibly large secondary market for them, it's a no-brainer for me. I don't necessarily collect Chloe bags or Louboutin shoes, but I do collect high-end trading cards. There's this trading card game called Magic the Gathering, and it has a very active secondary market that you can essentially invest into, and it's completely unregulated. Matter of fact, me collecting these cards bailed me out of a pretty bad spot in my life. During the housing crisis back in 2008, business was obviously slow, but it impacted mine dramatically. It was like a faucet being shut off. My income was almost zero. Thankfully, my interest rates weren't too bad, but I still had to pay for my basic living expenses somehow. And that's where my collection of cards came in. Having collected them since the 90s, they appreciated in value to an extent that shocked even me. Can you imagine these cards, these pieces of cardboard, paper really, that I paid dollars for, have become worth hundreds and hundreds of dollars each. Selling them on eBay for some months saved me when I desperately needed it. So when I look at a person, walking down the street carrying a Louis Vuitton bag, what I see is like a slower depreciating asset that's actually usable every day, and at the same time can be, a surprise nest egg. What I'm trying to accomplish with my response is to validate her taste in fashion and make it sound like a positive trait to have. You and I have all kinds of stories like these in our lives, but we might not have realized how it can be interesting to share. These examples are just a few ways to take our history and make it relatable or relevant to a conversation. I have some homework for you guys, though. The first part is taking an inventory of your nerdy past and try to relive those moments. When you're doing this, I want you to think about how those moments affected your life. There are some of you that are actually quite proud of their games and hobbies and have no issue willfully sharing that with anyone wanting to listen. Well, there's some homework for you too. So after everyone's figured out those moments in your life that might have proved interesting for others to know about, we need to figure out how to effectively work those bits into a conversation. It might help to start writing your thoughts down so you don't forget them because, you're for sure going to forget them until you practice them over and over again. Practice, you say? Well, I kind of need you to look at your story as like a stand-up comics routine. A routine is practiced and perfected. Firstly in private, then it's rolled out slowly, like to small audiences. The comic is trying to find out what hits well and what doesn't. And we need to kind of do the same. Jot down your story and read it back to yourself, and remember the goal is to make this relatable to most any person. That person won't have an intricate understanding of our hobbies, most likely. Also, you don't want to bore them by being too detailed or being too lengthy. We don't have a comedy club to run our scripts by, so feel free to tell your stories to your friends, family, and roll them out in conversations with women over time. I know the idea of a scripted conversation sounds bad, but think of it more like you're just caring about the words you use. Conversations are fluid, and there's really no way to script an entire conversation anyways. But having prepared ideas is a good thing. You'll come across as a thoughtful, unique, quick thinking, a social person, or much more. Remember to just be aware of how your stories are being received so you can tweak them or ditch them entirely if they just aren't good. Stories are fantastic tools in starting and keeping conversations going. As time goes on, I will share more ideas of how to talk to women, but mastering storytelling is going to be the cornerstone of our dating game, quote unquote. Just like in my first podcast, I browsed dating subreddits on Reddit to share with you advice how to give people from the perspective of a man who used the rule of 7 to date. Let's take a look at the first question. The Reddit user says, I met this girl at work who I think I've started having feelings for. I met her at my workplace. However, I'm only on a temporary visa. We've been talking for a month and we've hung out twice. Both times I initiated while we hung out. We were very touchy and flirty and I assumed we clicked. I started texting her more and asking her to hang out, and she would sometimes not reply. I could tell she wasn't really much of a texter, so I wasn't too concerned. I started to slowly back off and not text her as I assumed she wasn't interested being more. However, 2 weeks later, she texted me asking to grab lunch. I replied and said, yes, I would like to, but she doesn't reply. I later saw her at work and we talked about more about other things. Our work was seasonal. Unfortunately, it shut down due to the spread of the virus. Because of this, I knew I wasn't going to see her again if I didn't ask, so I sent a text letting her know that I liked her and would love to get to know her more as a person. More than a friend, that is. If anyone can give me an insight on what I'm seeing, please, that would be amazing. I just don't understand anymore. Saying goodbye was hard and it hurt, but I didn't want to regret not asking because I knew I would. Okay, I think it's great this guy was able to escalate during his first dates, which we know by him mentioning that he was touching her already. Awesome. But there are some things that stick out to me when reading this post. Number 1, he mentions she isn't much of a texter. And number 2, she reached out to him for lunch and she disappeared right after. When dating a woman, how hard do you try to get to know her really? It's not uncommon for me to talk about her previous relationships on the first date. I know this might sound like a bit much for like a first meeting, but within context of a conversation, this can be quite natural. And if she's willing to share with you, I think it's a good sign that she's being really personal with you. Anyways, what I'm getting at is I think she's just using this guy for easy attention and validation. And I wouldn't be surprised if she recently got out of a relationship. To address my first concern, do you guys know vast amounts of women who don't like to text? I've had girls tell me they don't like to text and their phone is like blowing up during the date from a dozen different people texting her. Just as a little experiment, you guys can try, just ask your friends if it's a common excuse to blow people off. And how much of a texter are they really? My second issue is when she asks the guy out to lunch and ghosts him again. It's obvious she was testing him, testing how much self-worth he has while looking to get a little validation for herself, by him jumping at the opportunity. If a girl starts to ghost you and you don't hear from her for 2 weeks, I really hope you think twice about giving this person the time of day again. Not to mention, during those 2 weeks, you should have been speaking to dozens of women. Stressing out over this one girl is just not a thing for a person following the rule of 7. We should all be trying to talk to as many women as possible, not just for the reason it proves to us that there are many, many opportunities out there, but it also normalizes us. My main goal for you adopting the rule of 7 is to make it foolproof, not to be this desperate. All right, to the next Reddit post. It says, I message people randomly. I get responses and numbers sometimes. How are these supposed to go? Should you try and text them on the app every day? Wait for them to initiate again? When do you ask if they're interested? Or ask what they're looking for? When should you ask for their number? I know a lot of women are hesitant, which makes sense. I just don't want the girl to forget about me, I guess. How do you gauge they're interested? Some women only respond to texts, not asking anything further. I think this is a hint they're not interested or shy. Sorry if this all sounds immature. I'm just trying to learn how this works. Thank you. And this post was about, how to interact with women on dating apps like Tinder. And it's a lot of questions from this guy, but I honestly think there are questions people should ask eventually. And I hope this guy finds the rule of 7 one day. All right, let's go through these questions. Should you try to text them on the app every day? I text them as much as I want to on the app. I don't really care if I send a paragraph over and over again. I don't put weight into this. I talk as much as I want to, and I talk about what I want. I want every interaction I am in to be interesting to me, primarily. I want value from the conversations and the relationships. If they get something out of it too, that's great, and that means we like to see eye to eye on topics. So essentially, I don't care how I'm perceived necessarily, and when you're talking to a bunch of different women, you won't really have the time to care. He then asked if I should wait for them to initiate again. So if you responded to a message and they haven't replied, then you don't reply further. Now let's say you're bored or you're needing the 7th person for your daily quota. Okay, then blanket message previous contacts who ghosted you and try to get someone to respond. If a woman didn't reply back to you, I'd like you to take an objective look at your message and ask yourself, was that message interesting to you? Make sure you take care in the words you use and what you say so that it's up to your standard of what is compelling. The Redditor continues with a question about when should we ask for her number? I touched on this before, but I asked the same day I matched with them as long as there's some decent rapport. I'll say it again. We don't have time to mess around. You'll find that some women just want to talk and feel you out and make you a friend or something along those lines. We aren't trying to make friends out here. We're trying to go on a date. Don't continue to validate women with your time if you don't get anything out of the interaction. I'll let you decide when you're tired of being taken advantage of. And also, sometimes the person you're talking to is just catfishing you. And the best way to get out of that potential predicament is to show how much you want to escalate this. The Reddit user kind of assumes this already when he says that women are sometimes hesitant and tacks on his fear about her forgetting about him. Man, that's just not a fear we can afford to have. I don't care if a woman forgets about me. I won't say, oh, it's her loss. No, I don't need a coping mechanism to deal with rejection. There are so many factors we can't control that goes into a woman's decision to not be interested in us. You and I, we have a ton of things to work on personally, and we're working on them. One day we'll find someone that appreciates us, and until then, we are being objective with who we are and improving things where we can. So the Redditor continues, stating that women aren't replying with much interest. I jokingly thought to myself that she at least responded, and that counts as one of our 7 for the day. Seriously though, determining real interest based off text replies is a skill we need to learn. So I'm glad he understands that he's just not interesting enough. To correct this issue, it's all about taking care to message someone with the hopes that you're going to engage in a conversation. If she can reply to your message without an opening for you to respond, firstly, understand you messed up. And secondly, you recover by taking better care of what you're writing. Analyze if it's what you're talking about that is the problem, or how you're saying it. Let's move on to one last question. The user says, I'm a dude in my mid-20s, never really had a serious relationship, but I've tried dating and socializing with women, much more than I used to. Now that I have a stable job and aren't as anxious around females, let me cut in here. Don't call people females. What is that? I'm trying to get out of my comfort zone and be someone that women would want to be with. And recently I've been out on a date with 3 different girls, and all 3 of them messaged me at some point after we'd met and said they just didn't feel a spark or a romantic connection and they don't want to lead me on. Normally I just accept that and move on, but to have that happen 3 times in a row has really affected me emotionally. I'm quite talkative with a nice range of things to talk about. I'm reasonably okay looking. I'm a well-kept person. I try to keep these things fun and engaging, but I don't know how I'm supposed to change. One reason I've considered is that these dates were just like social coffee dates with a lot of talking, and I didn't make any moves sexually. It did get hard at some points to keep the conversations going smoothly. These dates started and ended with a hug, as it was the first time meeting, and I didn't want to seem pushy. I've had better luck in first dates where I lead into touching and kissing and possibly further, but I don't want to assume the wrong thing. I did end up asking the 3rd girl what exactly it was that she felt was missing, and she insisted it wasn't anything I did or didn't do, and she just didn't have that feeling she had in the past with other guys. Can anyone shine some light on the situation so I don't lose hope altogether? Just reading this post makes me think about my start at dating. It wasn't necessarily any better than this guy's first 3 dates. What I like is that he's trying and he understands the gist of what needs to happen, which is, being a decent put together person who's trying to conversate and is analyzing his performance. That's a great way to begin the dating process. I respect that a lot. But unfortunately, it's not really clicking for him right now, but that's okay. I'm very surprised that all 3 women reached out to him and told him they just aren't interested. That's impressive. And whenever that happens to me, and it still does happen to this very day, it at least lets me start to be really critical about that particular date and see where I can improve. One thing I want everyone to understand is that it can take a long while to find someone that we connect with. We play a numbers game with the Rule 7 to improve our dating skills, but the byproduct of it is churning through potential partners in hopes that we come across as someone we are compatible with. The reality is that compatibility is going to be rare, incredibly rare. Let's also touch on how he talks about escalating with touch. I talked about this, everyone knows about it, and it's something to think about working into your game eventually, yes, but it doesn't have to be the end-all be-all of showing your interest in a woman. What do you want from this person you're dating? When I'm sitting at the table with her, if I'm liking her company and really want to pursue something with her, then I'll just say it. I'm not saying this is the right way or the best way. It's just what I do. I'll tell her right there and then that I like this interaction and I want to see her again and hope she thinks the same. Now, this is putting her on the spot kind of, and the response might not necessarily be true, but it's just what I do. I'm a bit forward. We have to be kind of conscious of what touch means to people and how that we're actually truly infringing on their personal space. And it might mean more to them than we understand. Just be careful considering that society is changing and progressing, and to function in it means we need to grow with it. Let me digress. The Redditor goes as far as to say this Redditor goes on to say that he asked one of the women what went wrong or what didn't happen. She says it wasn't anything he did, it's just that she didn't feel it. That's just not true. It's obvious he isn't what she wanted, and that involves him not saying the right things, not looking the right way, and not doing the right things. It's ridiculous to say that it wasn't him, but looking at the context of the interaction, it's probably automatic for women to say that it isn't anything the guy does. The reason for that is it's dangerous to tell the truth. Women aren't free to just break down all your failings, because what if it sets this guy or you off and he freaks out on her, or you freak out on her? This happens, and it keeps people from telling the truth when confronted. So don't do this to solicit ways to improve yourself. Don't ask a girl what you can do differently. It's important that we figure out that stuff ourselves, and that the reflection should start with the fact that we definitely did something wrong. It doesn't mean we have to change because maybe it wasn't wrong. It was just wrong for her. But regardless, we did something wrong in that specific circumstance with her. So how do we keep the Redditor from losing all hope? 3 dates shouldn't be a reason to lose all hope. Hell, I lost 3 matches in Age of Empires today. It doesn't mean I suck at the game, but it does mean we have something to improve upon. What I would say to him is that, do you think you're attractive to these women? Are you really that interesting? You say you're okay attractive, and the conversation is kind of hard to continue at sometimes. You're literally telling me you aren't perfect, and that you're wondering why women aren't interested. You don't need to be perfect, but his takeaway needs to be changed in his mindset. That his failure shouldn't demotivate, but should instead motivate him to be better at dating. So he has a stable job, and he isn't anxious around women. That's fantastic. Is that the basis of an attractive person, though? It sounds quite basic. Do you want a woman to be your girlfriend who is just okay with some everyday basic dude? No, not me. I wouldn't want anyone to see me that way. I want to be seen as an interesting, intelligent, and attractive person. I don't want to be sounding harsher than I need to. And I started off happy to see him trying, but at the end of the day, we need to respect ourselves, or no one else will. Okay, that's all for now, guys. Thank you so much for giving me your time, and I'll expand on my ideas about talking with women in future episodes. Take care.